Hiroki Chiba has been working on the Final Fantasy series for a very long time. For the most part, he served as a scenario and event writer during his 20 years employed at Square Enix, working on many games such as Chrono Trigger and Final Fantasy VII, even creating the character Vincent. However, with the announcement of World of Final Fantasy, Hiroki Chiba takes up the mantle of director, as he puts his biggest footprint on the Final Fantasy series. The following is an interview taken on September 3rd at PAX 2016, where Chiba-san and I delved into what exactly his direction is while creating World of Final Fantasy. What's up, PlayStation Insiders? My name is Dan Thompson here, the one and only Chiba-san working on World of Final Fantasy. So, what can you tell us more about World of Final Fantasy? So, with World of Final Fantasy, the Final Fantasy series is celebrating its 30-year anniversary. Our players have grown up with the series, and our player base has become very mature. We've realized that today not very many children or the younger audience take Final Fantasy in their hands and play the games. It's quite an unfortunate situation. So the executive producer for Final Fantasy, Shinji Hashimoto, was a little bit concerned and approached me asking, what can we do to introduce the greatness of Final Fantasy to our younger audience and have them play and enjoy what we can offer in the franchise? That was the original concept of this project. After that, we worked with the art designer, Yasuhisa Izumisawa, who has worked on previous titles such as Crystal Chronicles, and had him create chibi, 2 head-length characters. We showed those images to Mr. Hashimoto and Tetsuya Nomura as well, and then we came to the conclusion that we can use this to potentially create a new Final Fantasy IP that would appeal to a brand new audience. You've mostly been a writer for Final Fantasy games, like a scenario writer, so how does it feel to finally be directing like a headliner of the Final Fantasy series? When I joined on my first Final Fantasy, I was helping as an event planner, basically coming up with the different scenarios, structuring each cinematic that was in the game. It involved working with many different departments, including the sound team, graphics team, and a whole lot more. So you could say I already had some experience leading the direction of a Final Fantasy. So when I'm asked, did anything change being a director of a game, I don't feel like there's much of a significant change, and I don't feel like it was too hard of a transition. In terms of scenario writing, or any sort of writing in general, I feel as if you can't be on your own when writing. You have to work with the other teams and make sure that you're communicating with the many different people involved. Discussing which scenes would work in a scenario, what kind of wording is appropriate in situations, and staying on the same page with those involved in the different facets of a particular scene are all things you need to keep in mind. Everything I did led to directorial work, so I feel very comfortable working in this position. I feel as if the transition was relatively easy. Of course, entering Square Enix, I've had many great mentors, including Sakaguchi from Final Fantasy VI fame, Tanaka from Secret of Mana fame, and Kitase from Chrono Trigger fame. They taught me so many different things in terms of game design and creation. I feel that these men have contributed towards my experience greatly with the transition towards becoming a director for World of Final Fantasy. So is there, have you been designing any original characters, kind of like how you designed Vincent from Final Fantasy VII and World of Final Fantasy? Of course, World of Final Fantasy includes many legendary Final Fantasy characters, but there's just as many characters that are new to the title as well, including our protagonists, Rain and Lan, along with enemies and allies that they meet along their journey. There are some new monsters that appear in World of Final Fantasy as well. I also wanted to mention Tama and Seraphe. They are mirages, categorized similarly as the monsters in the game, but nothing of the sort. They're important key characters that are involved in the narrative, one of the many that are fleshed out greatly in the game. So do you guys take any inspiration? This has a much more lighthearted tone than usually the heavy-handed Final Fantasy games. Did you take inspiration from this tone from games like Kingdom Hearts? It has a very Disney charm to it, very Pixar quality with the animation. Is there any sort of like the tonal shift from the regular Final Fantasies to this world of Final Fantasy where it's a lot more lighthearted? You said that you were going to go after the kids who haven't like really grown up playing Final Fantasy, and trying to make that appeal to them with the story, whether it's like more lighter than the usual Final Fantasies or just like not as complex and it's still that heavy-handed.
そうですね。今回本当まずその彼らと
Of course, there's the concept that a fraction of our focus is targeting a younger audience that isn't familiar with the Final Fantasy franchise. We want to make it a fun adventure that our players will be able to experience through the eyes of our protagonists. You would expect from the visual depictions that it's going to be all cheerful and lighthearted, but not quite. We want to make sure that there will be scenes that are common with the Final Fantasy series, and we made sure that these scenes will grab you and pull you into the narrative emotionally. For this reason, we look forward to the reactions of everyone who will play the game. Alrighty, so last question, when can we expect Final Fantasy Worlds on Vita and PS4?
ワールドファイナルファンタジーは
For North America, World of Final Fantasy will be arriving October 25th this year. A limited edition of the game can be bought. That comes with an art book if you order ahead of its release and play it the day it comes out.
他の国よりも早く遊べるのかなと思いますので、北米のユーザーの方はぜひワンデーエディションを手に取って遊んでいただければと思います。
Well, it looks like Final Fantasy Worlds is shaping up to be the best way to experience and celebrate the Final Fantasy legacy up until the month before Final Fantasy 15 comes out. So I'm really excited to play it, Chiba-san. Thanks for the interview.